middle grade books that I read this year in 2022. Here I am to tell you, to share with you all of my middle grade reading knowledge from this year. I actually read 22 middle grade books this year, and I am here to tell you which are the top 5. I'm going to do these in order that I read them this year, so from what I read earliest in the year to what I read latest in the year. Starting with The Tournament of Gorlan. This is the prequel series to The Ranger's Apprentice. This book contains one of my favorite tropes that I don't see often enough. It is an ensemble cast that are together in a group, not split up, together in a group, preferably traveling. That is what happens in this book. As long as we have 4+ characters that are all unique, that you can distinguish these characters apart, and especially if they're traveling, oh my gosh, I love this trope and I don't see it enough. That happens in this book, and I really enjoy this prequel story to The Ranger's Apprentice. This is a prequel duology, and it was a reread for me, and I only reread the first book because that's where the most fun is for me. And the second book's mostly just battle tactics, and I don't really care that much. If you're a fan of both middle grade books and fantasy books, I highly recommend reading The Ranger's Apprentice, and I do recommend this prequel series. Next is The Barren Grounds. This is definitely one of my favorite books that I read this year. It is a portal fantasy. It is about 2 Indigenous children in our time living in Canada who are in the foster care system and away from their tribe, and they find a portal into a world that has creatures and stories from their legends. I was so fascinated and just drawn in to this story that I listened to the audiobook in one day. I finished it in one day and was like, that was amazing. The audiobook is also really well done. Highly recommend checking this one out if you are into portal fantasy and feels, because this book does have some feels. Next book on my list is The Witch of Blackbird Pond. This was one of the books I read during middle grade March. I read it because it's one of the Newbery winners. I don't remember if that was a prompt. I think award-winning book might have been a prompt. I'm not sure. But I read The Witch of Blackbird Pond, and it definitely deserves the Newbery Award that it won. I thought that this was going to be like Puritans and witch trials and a lot more suspenseful. It was not that. It was a cozy, warm, fun, fuzzy book about a girl living in the Puritan settlement in America during colonial times who was looking for a place to belong and looking for home and family. And yeah, there are witch trials. One witch trial in this book, but it wasn't like played up as this like big witch trial thing. I was just drawn into the story right away. I'm definitely glad that I read this one. This was one I missed reading when I was a kid, but I'm definitely glad I came back to it as an adult. The next one is The Case of the Missing Marquess. This is the first book in the Enola Holmes series. I did enjoy the first book more than the second book. I've only read the first 2 this year, but I've enjoyed getting to read this middle grade Enola Holmes book about the dysfunctional Holmes family. Enola is the younger sister to Sherlock Holmes, and her family is anything but normal. I read the first 2 books and I watched the Netflix series, and I found these books to be very fun. The mysteries are actually really well done and can be appreciated as an adult reading the books. I definitely was pleasantly surprised by how much I enjoyed these books. And coming in at number 5 is the Wings of Fire series. This is one of my favorite middle grade series. I first read this series as an adult, and I have since reread it. And my favorite books are in the first arc. So my favorite books in this series are probably The Hidden Kingdom and The Brightest Night. This is a book from the perspective of dragons. It's dragon fantasy. These dragons have been locked in a decades-long war, but there's been a prophecy that these certain dragons that are going to hatch on the brightest night are going to end the war and bring peace. So there's this certain peacekeeping movement who steals the dragon eggs and then tries to manipulate the dragons into ending the war the way they want it to end. And then the young dragons realize this and they try to escape and chaos ensues, and it's a really gripping story for a middle grade fantasy story. I enjoyed reading it for the first time as an adult. It's one that I've come back to and reread. I think it's one that can be enjoyed by all ages, which is why it's on this list. I know I'm including the whole series. My favorite books are The Hidden Kingdom and The Brightest Night. I think those are the strongest books in the series, or at least the ones that I enjoyed the most. So I hope you enjoyed this list of my favorite middle grade books that I read this year. I know most of them were fantasy. Fantasy's kind of my jam, so of course I'm going to include mostly fantasy books. If you made it this far in the video, leave either a dragon emoji or like a sword emoji for the fantasy books on this list. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you got something out of it. Let me know what your favorite middle grade book that you read, or just your favorite book that you read this year, in the comments. Thank you for watching. I hope to see you in another video, and happy reading. Yes, that was a bit ridiculous. It's okay.